Hi, my name is Matthew Paul Olmos, and if you want to learn more about my new play, Underneath the Freeways of Los Angeles and the Echo Theater Company, watch this video. So my journey to the theater is a bit odd, I think, in that I never saw a play until I was in college, senior in college, actually. It just wasn't something I was aware of. Weirdly, I was really into film, I was really into the arts, but theater has never crossed my path, really. And then my senior year of university, I was taking all the writing courses in the school, short story classes, screenwriting, stuff like that. And I just took an intro to playwriting on sort of a lark. And pretty quickly, like my teacher pulled me aside and was like, who are you? Because I wasn't a theater major. She didn't know who I was. He was like, you're good at this. You should consider this. And I really didn't know what to do with that even because I liked writing, but I never thought about theater. Because I didn't know anything about theater also, like it was so foreign to me. But pretty quickly, I got really into it. So I switched majors and I stayed an extra year at university to do a theater degree with an emphasis in playwriting. And then after that, I went to grad school. So like I was late coming to it, but it's often made me feel a little bit like an outsider in the theater world because like I definitely didn't grow up, going to plays. I wasn't in musicals when I was younger at all. But there's something about it that just struck me, and writing specifically for the theater versus other types of writing, it's just something that speaks to me, and I almost can't explain it, but like I adore working in theater and working as a playwright in theater. I love going to rehearsal and being in the room and discovering stuff. And even though I value other types of writing, playwriting and being the playwright in the room is like my most moved me in a certain way, and I love discovering. So I was thinking about this the other day. I remember, I guess I never got into theater because I thought plays were a certain thing, and maybe they're sort of like a little boring or sort of musical type stuff. And then I remember being in the library at UT Santa Barbara where I went to school, and I was reading Sam Shepard's Buried Child. And I was like, oh, whoa, this is like, I didn't know theater was like this. This is crazy. This person's holding this leg and like keeping it. And there was something else about the language that Shepard used I really, really connected with. And so that's why the first time where I was like, oh, I could actually see myself in the sort of stories I like to write in theater. So that was a huge discovery for me. I generally begin a project, I'll be reading an article or a book, and then something will sort of catch my eye, and then it'll be like, oh, that one little fact in this big story or big topic will sort of have something about it where it's like, oh, I think there's something there that I can actually work with. So like, for example, I wanted to write a piece about the drug wars. This is, years ago now, but the drug wars, the US-Mexico drug wars. And so I was doing all this research, and, I love all the research, but I don't really have an in yet. And then I read about this woman who was a police chief in Mexico and the only one who would take the job after the last police chief was beheaded. Her story sort of hooked in. It's actually, there's not a lot on her out there, but like that little hook got me, and I was like, oh, okay, I have something there. So I keep researching and researching. But as I'm researching now, I sort of have an idea of a character. I have an idea of some sort of storyline. So I always start with research, and then often if I get lost in a project, I go back to research. I just feel like it feeds me in a way where I like, and I don't actually even use technically the research all the time. It's in the piece. I kind of assume it's inherent in my knowledge about the topic at a certain point. I just write with it. Sometimes I'll go back and check like a fact or something if it's a more historical piece. But yeah, it's always with research, and then throughout the process, I'm constantly returning and being like, I need to read some more before I continue this because I'm going to. And then after that, really the exciting part is just, get together a director and some actors, usually before a play is finished, and I'll set up a table read, just have them come in, and it's sort of like a deadline for me, but also like the discussion after the play, really what it is. And I feel like I'm writing, and I can feel that it's right. I feel that something in there is valid, but I don't really know what the play is or what it's about or how it functions yet. And then once I'm in the room with actors and a director or choreographer, whatever it is, I'm like, oh, okay. Now that I'm hearing them discuss it, I can sort of understand it myself. So that's generally how the process, for the most part, goes. I spent most of my career in New York, and then I think in 2016, I started spending about half the year out here in LA. And I felt very, a little bit, not lost, but the word is like, I was nervous, I guess, because I'd spent so many years like developing relationships in New York, getting to know theater, and that was really my world. And so when I got out here and spending more time here, I was actually quite nervous because I just didn't know I knew the big theaters like the Mark Taper and the Geffen and stuff like that. I didn't know all the sort of cool indie theaters or smaller theaters. And so I was kind of just looking on Facebook. I was looking at friends, who were out here and what they were doing. So I was basically like doing that thing you do at the beginning of your career, was look at people's bios. And, a lot of writers who I respect had been through there. And then coincidentally at the same time, Jennifer Chambers from the Echo, who was running the lab in 2016, emailed me almost out of the blue and was like, hey, I've heard from some fellow playwrights that you're now out here, and like, I read your writing, I really like it, would you want to be part of the lab? So I did a year, I think in 2016 in the Echo Theater Lab. And it was, some writers I knew from New York, like Janine Neighbors and Becca Brunstetter, and then some new writers like Bonnie Alfred, who I didn't know yet, but, love. So that's how I got involved. And then, what's cool about the Echo also is that, like, even though it was just the 1 year and you get to do the Lab Fest, and, Jennifer was pretty clear, like, I hope you all consider Echo your artistic home now. You are a resident writer here. So what I really value about them is, they're playwright driven, but also, like, it feels like once you're in this family, you're in the family. When Chris called me up for this project, didn't feel like, oh, the theater's approach me. It felt like, oh, cool, like one of my artistic homes. I feel like theaters that have labs for writers or writing groups, whatever they call it, I think one thing that I really notice talking to playwrights out here, especially ones that are busy doing TV or film, whatever, how much they miss being in the room with other playwrights. And it's just something that's so valuable. Like, so to meet regularly and just have colleagues of yours comment on your work, is inspiring, but also, like, you learn a lot. You learn a lot just from being around and watching their process. Even if their plays are totally different from your plays, there's just something about it. Like, I remember just reading, or hearing this epic play Bonnie was working on in the lab, and it was like, let's say it was a 3-act. It was at least like a 3-hour piece. And normally, like, that would just scare me, but like the way he was working on it, the way he was developing it, was just fascinating to me, and it made me almost like, I'm always scared that the play's going to be too long, or like the audience is going to get, it's a commitment for them. But he just had no fear of it. And so I remember just being very inspired and hearing, like, okay, maybe I can think about these larger scope projects and not be scared, like, that the theater's going to look at it and be like, whoa, we can't do this. But it was inspiring to see someone just be like, I'm doing a 3-hour. That's what this story needs. It was necessary, but then also, I remember his lab reading was glorious. It was fascinating, and sort of like, it didn't feel like 3 hours. This project, the idea really came before Chris actually asked me to do it. So when I've been back here, like, off and on the last few years, spending half my time basically in LA, half in New York. Since the pandemic, I've been out here full time. And as I've been here, I've been kind of rediscovering Los Angeles. So I'm originally from LA, but since I spent most of my adult life away, either going to college or going to grad school or just spending my time in New York, when I've been back in Los Angeles, I've been, how am I going to try this? So when I've been back in Los Angeles, it's almost been like exciting for me to revisit, like, places I went to as a kid, places where my family used to live, was East L.A. And so I've been just had this kind of crazy curiosity about things that I knew a little bit about growing up, but I never really got into it because I was a kid mostly, So, whether it's the Chavez Ravine and Dodger Stadium, whether it's the freeways, and how they've been run through certain neighborhoods in Los Angeles, all that stuff has a weird just fascination, I guess, because I'm natively from here, but I haven't really spent time in a certain way because I've been gone for most of my life. So I was just dying and already researching the freeways, the Chavez Ravine thing on my own. And then Chris called me and he was like, hey, like, I really want to try something during the pandemic on Zoom, where we do like a criminal, like, interrogation type play where the audience is sort of like the interrogators. That's right up my alley. And so I went and I thought of like several ideas that could have that sort of quality, that sort of interactive crime quality. And then basically, lucky for me, like, the one he really was drawn to was the one I probably wanted to do the most, which was this idea of, if there was a crime, as construction was finishing the freeway that runs Boyle Heights. Like, it's weird. I kind of had like the topic I wanted to talk about already, and I was already working on it. And then Chris happened to call me in the middle of that. And I was able to marry the two. And now it's interesting because it's I don't know what I would have come up with if I didn't have the interactive element, because now I'm so married to the I did create. So it felt like a nice what's the word, like, serendipitous type thing where I was like, oh my god, this came at the perfect time. Yeah. So the play imagines that right as the piece of the Golden State Freeway is being finished and opens up for traffic, right as that's opening up, amidst all the protests that were going on at the time of people who didn't want the freeways to be there, there's 2 bodies found in Hollenbeck Lake in Boyle Heights. And so the audience comes in to question suspects and to figure out what happened. Basically, it's almost like you're getting sent into the precinct, into the questioning rooms, and you're getting to talk to the suspect, and you have to try and figure out who or how this happened. So they first are introduced for a sort of a storyteller or sort of narrator or guide through the experience. Her name is Ellie. Then they also meet Officer Banham, who is in charge of the investigation. Then they meet Mrs. K. Shimo, who's a local mother who lives nearby the park. They meet Dee Dee Echevarria, who is actually a young artist who found the bodies and reported it to the police. And then they meet Lucretia Jacobs, who is a very passionate protester of the freeways. And then they meet James Rouser, who works for the California Division of Highways. And then they meet a mysterious character named Efren, who's sort of a local wanderer, sort of like mystery guy who just hangs around. He's always out there the Boyle Heights, the cat of Boyle Heights, just seen everywhere all around town. Yeah, those are the characters. So what's exciting to me about it theater-wise is that there's a script and there's things that all the characters know, and there's a actual text they memorize and have. But we don't really have a sense. We're not going to try and tell the audience exactly what to ask or exactly how to do this. We're actually rehearsing right now is throwing the actors sort of like curveballs and saying like, well, what if they ask this question? What if they just jump in with this? So like the live part is what's exciting to me is that like each character has their story and what they know to be true and what they want to say, but they have no idea what the audience is going to give them as a question. A lot of improvisation as well. What we're hoping is that the really exciting parts are when like the audience is like, wait a second, because you're aware, so to really have those live moments where the audience can feel that it's not scripted. So they're scripted and unscripted, so that the meaning of that is really sort of the audience really feel like, oh, okay, I'm actually involved here. It isn't just I say this and they say this, I say this and they say this. It's be a very like interactive sort of like live feeling. This piece, it really started like I started bringing in pages, and then Chris Fields and Alana Dietz, the producer and the artist, we would just have sort of script meetings, and we would just read what I wrote and that we would comment on it. So I started developing with them already, like bringing this piece of the script in, and then sort of talking about both the script itself, but also the functionality as it works interactive. And then once that was pretty much set, then we started talking about directors and cast and all that stuff. And the cool thing for me also is that I actually don't know any of the cast or the director. I hadn't worked with them before. So for me, just selfishly, I'm getting to meet some of the awesome talent in LA. And then the cool thing also is that in rehearsals, I mean, it's all through Zoom, obviously. So rehearsals are everyone in the living room, basically, but the fun part really is that like we're all sort of figuring this out as a team, being like, okay, oh, we could do this, we could put this in the lobby, we're all kind of brainstorming, having ideas of like, oh, it'd be cool if we tried this sort of. It's kind of a fun like team. It feels like trying to figure out how to orchestrate this interactive experience. So the idea when the audience actually logs on for the evening, they'll be given some information by one of the characters about like, so here's how this is basically going to function, and it's going to say like, you're going to be meeting with these certain people. And then these just may be some of the things you want to like try and out of them. Where were they? What did they do about this? What time did they do this? And then basically the groups of audiences will be directed to different holding rooms where the different characters are at. They enter their exchange with that character. Once that one goes to the next one. So each group of audience members go to all the different rooms. In the second half, they'll come back to the main room, and then they'll be sort of guided through some more of the storytelling, and then they'll go back and have a re-question them up, or even discuss amongst themselves. Like, actually, I want to hear more about that character. They said they were doing it that morning. And actually, then go back, re-question. Obviously, first I want it to be exciting, and then just like thematically, it's important to me to have stories that have sort of socio-political relevance. So I'm hoping, aside from the sort of who did it mystery sort of like engagement, that there is some sort of thought also about what this historical event of the freeways meant to Los Angeles and meant to people. So I'm hoping there's some themes in there that'll come out of it. I think it's an exciting thing that's been done on Zoom as far as theater goes, and I think also it'll be a cool way to look at how we were able to actually engage with each other, even though we're in this pandemic. But I also think especially anyone who, I would say LA specifically, but I think anyone living in any city, I think it's important to think about also like what the cost of progress has been versus the communities. whatever sort of, city or large, bigger, small city, whatever it is. So I just think it's important to think about, because I think we often walk around our city or wherever it is we live, and we don't think often about the history that I think we walk around a lot, and we don't necessarily think about the history or how things got to be the way they are. I think it's an enlightening show as well, that people will be like, oh, I didn't know that about Los Angeles history. I mean, for me, a theater like the Echo, anyone that's really pushing new work, to me is important. As much as I enjoy and sort of appreciate when people have a different take on an old play, or they want to do a certain version of Shakespeare or something like that, I just always think, like, in terms of theater being a really relevant art form, like if you just look outside the window, there's so many things going on in the world. It makes so much sense to me to have stories that are being the actual world we live in currently, as opposed to going back and getting this classic, but just really taking a chance on new plays and new conversations that we haven't had yet, as opposed to revisiting classics. As much as I love seeing them as a theater person, I love just going to new work. Even if the new work sometimes isn't fully formed or isn't my cup of tea, whatever it is, like, I get more out of that. Hi, my name is Matthew Paul Olmos, and my play Underneath the Freeways of Los Angeles is playing at the Echo Theater Company. And if you enjoy this conversation, check out the interactive show at the Echo's website.